you are getting output metrics that are closer to the fundamental value creation of the business.
Right.
How quickly are you getting to a contract being closed? How quickly is that revenue coming in the door? That is the language of business. And so when you as a counselor can show up with that kind of information and those kinds of insights, I find you typically have a much more productive, constructive, and engaged conversation.
Welcome to Law Next. This is Bob Ambrogi, and today we have a special episode featuring a roundtable discussion of innovation in corporate legal departments. We're at Legal Week in New York, where I'm joined by a panel of 4 experts for a conversation about how legal departments are changing and, in particular, how they're using data and metrics to help drive that change. We'll get to today's interview in just a moment. But first, let's hear from the sponsors who generously support Law Next. And now, on to this week's interview. So to get started, I'm going to kind of go around the table and ask each of you to introduce yourself very briefly so that we can associate some names with some voices here. And Jason Barnwell, let me just start with you.
My name is Jason Barnwell. I'm an assistant general counsel for Modern Legal. Our team is focused on applying Microsoft's technologies, tools, and platforms to build the future of our practice of law.
And Lori Ehrlich.
I'm Lori Ehrlich from Cognizant. I'm the head of our legal operations department. I have a long experience doing commercial contracting for Cognizant before taking on this role, and we're really looking at how to do everything better.
Just everything?
Everything.
Jeff Reel.
Hi, my name is Jeff Reel, and I'm the Global Chief Technology Officer for LexisNexis, and I'm responsible for all things technology within our company.
And my name is Mark Smolik. I'm General Counsel with DHL's operations in the Americas.
Well, I want to start with this concept of innovation. I mean, we are the panel is billed as being about innovation, and we are at a legal technology conference. And I realize that innovation has become this word it's thrown around with impunity, I think, in the legal profession these days. But I wonder if we can just kind of talk about what it means to you in the context of what you're doing. And Mark, you want to start us off?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. For me, when you think of innovation, there's really 2 sides of the equation. One is there's a way of thinking. And some of the most innovative people are those that embrace new approaches, new technologies to solving anything from simple to complex problems. But at the end of the day, it is still a way of approaching business, whether you're managing a law department, whether you're managing a business, it doesn't really matter. The business line you're in, professional services or goods. But you have to think, in many regards, like the business that you are representing. If you're running a business, you have to think, in many regards, not just operationally, but as your customer. What are those customers' expectations? But some of the most innovative people that I have seen in the legal industry are those that embrace not just new ways of thinking, but technologies that help promote efficiency, that help identify and perhaps mitigate risks in the organization. So for me, it's always a balance between the two. The thought process that you have, and the more that you align with the business, the better off that you are, at least in my experience, in the service delivery. But marrying that up with new approaches to solving complex legal issues, whether you're dealing in the legal operations space. But you have to think differently, particularly in this industry where so many things are changing in the legal ecosystem as a whole, particularly on the technology front.
Yeah. Lori, does that resonate with you? I mean, how do you think about that word?
It does. I think, though, technology is super important when you reach the point of implementation. But I think before you even get there, it's about changing people and how we think about issues. Legal for a long time, we are experts, we are professionals. You can't break down what I do. There's no science behind it. Each thing that we do, our favorite answer is, it depends, to any question that you get. And so teaching the people in our group to think, well, is everything I'm doing really specialized legal knowledge? Or are there things that we can break it apart and think about it in new ways? Think about how we can demystify what's happening when work comes into the legal department.
Yeah. Jason, how about you? How do you kind of think about innovation in the context of what you're doing? And that's kind of your day job, right? Is supposed to be all about innovation.
Yes, indeed. My side hustle is now my day job. I have maybe an overly simplistic view of it. There is work that we must do, and let's put it into two categories. The things that we already know how to do that we should figure out better ways to do. And then there's the things that we're going to do tomorrow that we need to go figure out what those are and how we're going to go after that. And so a lot of our investment strategy is thinking about how we bridge the gap, because it turns out we observe there's a paradox. These are not two separate things. In the process of unbundling your work and figuring out how you're going to do the things that you do today even better, it often gives you the insights that lead you to the things that you will do tomorrow. And so there's a virtuous cycle that we observe there.
Yeah. Jeff, you're maybe in a kind of an unusual position in that you probably are looking at both how you can be helping LexisNexis customers drive innovation, but you are also within an organization that has to be doing it itself.
Right.
So what's your perspective?
Yeah, I think a lot of folks have kind of covered a novel ways to solve problems. And one of the big challenges that you have is if you do come up with a novel idea, a new approach to solving a problem, is how do you get that to stick within an organization? How do you get people to adopt that? So when we look at our external customers, we have to look at it from the perspective of, can they adopt this technology? Does it fit into their workflow? Can they change within their organization to support these new ideas? So you don't only have to look at the innovation itself, but can that innovation be applied to certain situations? And so the change management aspect is also kind of a key part. How do you get people to adopt? How do you make it as simple as possible? How do you explain the why this is important and why this new way of doing things actually makes sense?
Can I build on that?
Yeah, of course.
So that is spot on, because if you look at the resource that is scarcest for us, it's human attention. And so anything that we're doing that introduces something new into the mix, we have to be very mindful and thoughtful about making sure that the investment pencils out. And whenever a partner is very thoughtful about how that can be delivered to us with the lowest change cost, adoption and engagement are going to benefit. And so we are much more likely to see success. And so that kind of thinking really resonates for us. And when we see that kind of thinking put into practice, it delivers much better outcomes when we actually have the technology, the capability land on our shores, and people actually use it.
Yeah. I mean, I hear you talking about people, I hear you talking about change management. It sounds like there are, to some degree, obstacles to be overcome within, not just within a legal department, but within a company. I mean, what are some of the obstacles that you've had to deal with in terms of trying to bring more of an innovation mindset into your work? Anybody want to take that?
Yeah, I'll be more than happy to kick off. I really think in many regards it is what objectives you're trying to achieve. So for example, when I look at our legal department, and I've been in-house now for almost 30 years in a number of different companies, but there's the fixed cost side of the department. That is the people, the pens, the paper, the rent, and everything else that has to be paid. And then there's a variable side, which is the external spend, whether it's outside counsel, alternative legal service providers, et cetera. And in many regards, that spend can be significantly more than the in-house spend. But in many regards, when you approach running the department, more perhaps from a legal operations perspective, like a business, and you understand how much money does the business need to generate just for me to have $1 to spend, and you begin to think like a business and take fiscal responsibility for the amount of money that you are spending, and you're talking to the business about, look, here is what I am spending of your money, and here is what, and you understand what they need to generate in revenue for you to have that money to spend, the more you resonate, at least internally. But when you look at the variable side, particularly with regard to external service providers, there is almost kind of a Wild West in many regards. Now, I've been at Sherwin-Williams in-house. I was a general counsel of Safelite Auto Glass and now at DHL. And legal matters crop up, litigation, claims, regulatory investigations, whatever they may be. In many regards, they're unbudgeted. But the more fiscal discipline you can bring into where you are spending your money, giving the visibility to the business about the money that you're being spent, and holding your outside counsel or your outside legal service providers accountable to certain metrics or key performance indicators, just like you hold your own team accountable, brings a new dynamic to the equation that some would say, well, that's an innovative, perhaps different way of thinking, but it is also helping drive the value proposition as well, Bob, particularly when you are perhaps building a reputation in the organization of you've got a leader who is leading the department who happens to have a law degree, more of the business approach to the practice of law. So for me, it is looking at both sides of the equation, trying to find a way that you can communicate continuing and sustainable measurable value to the organization in whole, and just being very fiscally prudent and disciplined in that approach.
So if you can measure and show results, that's one way of
Well, it is. I mean, every board meeting that I go to, members of the business present their 4-panel presentations. It's one piece of paper. How many units are we selling? What is our cost? What's SG&A? But in the legal department, you don't have that. You have a number of lawsuits or claims settled. At the end of the day, what is really meaningful to the business and what is meaningful to them is how are you spending your money, our money, and what are you doing to help us appropriately identify and mitigate our risks? And particularly when we struggle, as we do every corporation about this time of year, outside counsel sending in letters saying, hey, my fees are going up 5, 10, 15%, you're looking at, well, where's that money going to come from? And it's got to come from the business. So you've got to have a justifiable way of convincing them that there is value in that additional spend.
Yeah.
You know, in thinking about the challenges that you face as you bring innovation, and measurement is such a big one, not just with outside counsel, but internally. You know, a lot of lawyers that go in-house because they're tired of accounting for their time. They don't want to think of their time in 6-minute increments anymore.
Right.
And all of a sudden we're saying, well, you know, we really need to know what you're working on, how much time you're spending on this, how much time you're spending on that, so that we can, you know, not just work on those variable, unknown expenses that might arise through outside counsel, but to re-examine what those fixed costs are. You know, C&B is such a huge part of running a legal department, and we have historically, you know, just added more lawyers as business has grown, but we can't keep doing that. You know, the more for less is definitely harder and harder hitting, and you need to be able to think, you know, can I change my FTE base, have more, you know, value add work for the higher level of more expensive attorneys, and push the things that are not, you know, important legal knowledge issues down to lower level resources, and find a way to shrink those C&B costs.
Yeah. So, Jason, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. So, 2 thoughts. One, I think Mark offered a framing which works on both the macro and the micro level. So, if we kind of net it out, it's if we're asking people to do something different, if we're asking people to bring something new to invest, it has to pencil out. It needs to create value that makes it worth whatever you're asking the trade-off. And that operates at both the organizational scale, but going back to one of the questions you asked, like why is it so hard to get people to change and to embrace innovation? People are also making that same calculus for themselves, right? When you come to them as an individual and you say, I would like you to change how you are practicing, they're going to rely on a heuristic that could be based on decades of experience that says, oh gosh, they came up with a new shiny toy, and we've done this so many times, and so I'll just wait for the next one. And so I think people we often think like, oh gosh, why is this so painful? And the reason is because people are observant and they're smart and they're being rigorous about having a very high bar about making sure the value pencils out. And then that leaps over to what you were talking about, which is it's actually really hard to measure the value of our work. And by that I mean the intrinsic value. We do an okay job of measuring people's effort, but it's very hard to translate that into the impact to the business. And that's where I think the next several years are going to give us new tools so we can actually start connecting those dots, and we can see that effort and that activity focused to constructive goals and ends, and then we'll actually see that impact that makes it easier for us to go to the business and say, if you give us more resource, we will do things that accelerate the business, and I'm going to show you how that works.
Absolutely.
And by measuring our work, are you talking, when you say our work, are you talking about within your legal department, or are you talking about the big we of outside counsel and in the legal department and everybody else?
Yes.
Okay. I'll go with that.
Yeah,
Jeff?
I'll just add, one of the big obstacles is just inertia, right? This is the way we've always done things.
Right.
And, people have been with an organization for a long time. They know what has worked. They go back to what they felt has worked in the past. And so a big key to that is explaining the why. Why is this innovation better? How is this going to make your life easier? How is this going to make you more effective? I think the metrics play into it because that's real data that suggests that, look, by taking this different approach, by doing things a different way, I'm getting this benefit either individually from the work that I do or as a business. So I think breaking that down, helping people understand what the benefits are to the change, understanding how that impacts their role is absolutely key.
I mean, it sounds like the data and the metrics is probably going to be a pretty critical part of that. I mean,
Yes.
if the expression you can't manage what you can't measure or whatever it is, that if that gives you the ammunition to show this is working or this isn't working or whatever, right? And does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. Here we are at the largest legal conference meeting in the world, right? Once a year, and if we walk 100 feet out of this room, we've got hundreds and hundreds of legal vendors all trying to vie for the same legal department dollar. And at the end of the day, that may be very important to the legal ops people, but think of all the legal hold companies that are out there, the e-discovery companies as well. I'm sure there is a value there, but it is one small tool in a giant toolbox. If you really want to move the dial and you're comfortable that the service that you as a department are delivering to the business is delivering that meaningful value and that you are being fiscally prudent with your spend, Jason, as you indicated, it is literally all of the above, then bring a different discipline. I don't know about you folks, but when I sit down, I talk to my CFO or my CEO, they really don't care about the e-discovery platform I have, the matter management platform, the e-billing. They don't care about the e-guidelines. At the end of the day, they want to know that I am being very disciplined with the spend. So for me, just to give you an example, the most innovative approach that I didn't even think was very innovative, when I started at DHL, having come on the heels of my stint at Safelight, where I was also head of HR, I said, why aren't we evaluating the performance of our outside counsel? Hold them accountable to key performance indicators, just like we all get held accountable to. For those of you that do get annual performance reviews with your supervisor, you know that you'll learn during that process what you're doing well and what you're not. And you act on what you're not. And sometimes that helps you drive your compensation. But if you do that with your external legal service providers consistently, then you're going to find a better value proposition. What we ended up finding, not just at Safelight, but at DHL, is we've done these types of performance reviews every single year, and low-performing firms where we had high spend were turned into high-performing firms with high spend. And we just sat down and said, if you really want to move the dial on institutionalizing our relationship, you'll act on this feedback. And firms...
Is that a demand or is that a request?
No, this is more of a request to them. You can't force the horse to drink the water. If they don't want to act on it, they don't. But they have to realize that we live in a hyper-competitive world when it comes to getting access to the corporate law department spend. And if you are a service provider, you have to be able to deliver that significant value. For decades, this industry, particularly when it comes to retaining outside service providers in the law department, has been based on the soft side of the relationship. Who did you know from school? Who did you play golf with? Who did you go to dinner with, or what have you? But as the industry continues to change, and you find more leaders in GC or legal ops roles than you find lawyers. Now, don't get me wrong, you're always going to probably find a lawyer in the GC role, but boards of directors are looking for the leadership attributes more than legal attributes, because we can hire good talent, which is what I have done. I'm a better business person than I am a lawyer, quite candidly. But you're going to find this balance between marrying up the soft side of the relationship. Why did I hire you in the first place? Jeff, it's because I really liked you, we did a good job. But at the end of the day, you got to perform, just like I have to perform. And that's where some of the hard data comes in to provide insight based on these performance reviews about how well somebody's doing or perhaps how not.
So I assume you're all doing it. I mean, you're all looking to your outside counsel to be providing KPIs. Is that just a default these days, or is that still
We're just at the beginning of it. So we just conducted our first real panel RFP. And we're working on right now and coming up with the scorecards that we want to use with the firms going forward that will apply to all our firms, not just our main players.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a new area for us.
Yeah.
So Rebecca Benavides, who leads our legal business and strategy team, she has a fairly mature process, and she's bringing different types of data to basically create the scorecards that will help us evaluate how are our partners doing holistically. And so that brings in the feedback that we capture, brings in the financial data, brings in some of the outcomes of the matters, it brings in diversity data, it brings in pro bono information. And so we're trying to get a more 360-degree look at how our partners really are aligning with the things that we think bring value and that align with the strategic priorities that we have as an organization, so that our general counsel can make informed decisions about where she wants to steer the work. Because at the level that she operates at, we can't be too granular, right? Like she manages a forest, not a bunch of trees. And so we're trying to be very thoughtful and intentional about giving her that view at the right elevation so that we can get clear feedback about where she wants us to go.
Yeah. Are there other ways, can you give me an example of a way, say, that you are using data and metrics in your department very specific to what you're doing? I mean, is there something that you're doing in particular?
Sure. So the area that I'm most excited about is in the contract space. And we are, last year we did our first ever metrics collection project, trying to look at what are the volume of contracts that we're handling, what are the types of contracts that we're handling, what are our turnaround times for the contracts, does it make a difference if we're on our paper versus third-party paper, does it make a difference based on what third-party advisor the client has brought to the table. And we're really able to look at this and think, well, this is working well and this isn't working well, and here we need to keep in mind these aspects. And of course I can't talk about those specific aspects here, but it's really helping us to think about who we have working on matters and how we can adjust the way we look at contracting to be faster, close contracts sooner, and come up with better terms for those contracts that are less likely to lead to things like revenue leakage.
Right, and then as part of the outcome also just resource allocation. I mean, is it?
Resource allocation, but also, we're one of the things that I'm very excited. Our IT team is working on creating a data lake that's going to pull together the information from our sales team and the information from our delivery excellence team and the information from our contracting process to try to really create a feedback loop so that we can work on constant improvement of our contracting terms so that we can drive better results. Fewer disputes, which is good for us and good for our clients, fewer instances of contracts and operations not meeting each other in the way that everyone expects. And so hopefully, we'll just be able to drive better outcomes for our clients down the road.
Yeah.
Your story is perfect. Can I dive into a couple things that I think are patterns that we're going to see more of? So one is, you've got this virtuous cycle of data that allows you to see where you're going and then adjust. And I suspect it also allows you to potentially run experiments, right? Like you can come up with a hypothesis that if we change this term, the velocity may increase, or decrease or what have you. And that's really advanced. The fact that you're bringing these capabilities online is very impressive. The other thing that I find really interesting is you are getting output metrics that are closer to the fundamental value creation of the business.
Right.
How quickly are you getting to a contract being closed? How quickly is that revenue coming in the door? And that's something that our customers can understand. That is the language of business. And so when you as a counselor can show up with that kind of information and those kinds of insights, I find you typically have a much more productive, constructive, and engaged conversation with your business executives. And so the story that you have to offer, I think, is emblematic of the future of where more of our practice should be going.
Yeah, I wish we were there today, right now. We're still building this loop, which will help us to get there.
As a member of the legal technology area here at the table, this is exactly what we do. We're trying to help. We work with a lot of law firms. We work with a lot of corporate counsel. We have a lot of this data. We have benchmarking data on matter costs and where those benchmarks are around different parts of the country, different firms, and so that's a big focus for us. Contract analytics. We recently formed a joint venture with a company called Knowable, and that's a lot of what they do is they look at contracts and they do analytics around those contracts. So, we see that in the marketplace, and certainly that's where we focus a lot of our attention, based on a need that we are seeing, and you guys are just kind of reinforcing that.
Yeah,
So-
I think
yeah, go ahead.
if I can add to that a little bit. I think you're probably a little bit ahead of the curve with regard to your look at the various contracts, but I say that in a very, very complimentary way, because I think in many legal departments, the approach is a matter will come in, a contract comes in, and it takes the time it takes to get it done. But those that understand what is the cost associated with it, for example, what you are doing, if I look at my own organization, we have within the legal department a commercial contracts management group. It's 21 people around the Americas. They're not lawyers, but they're some of the best contract drafters and negotiators I've ever seen. All in, fully loaded, it's $72 an hour versus a lawyer that's $174 an hour. So just getting the business aligned with the value has saved a significant amount of money. We have 2,200 contracts that we do on any annual basis in the Americas, but I find that the educated customer is perhaps the best consumer. When I started, we had an 84-page form agreement. It's now down to 14 pages. It's not just getting down to 14, but it's getting the business to understand it. Here are the things that we have trained them on, really self-sufficiency, what they can handle on their own. So your data, I think, would inevitably lead to a much more informed, call it internal buying group. And it's something that is very, very exciting. More and more law departments were to embrace that approach. I think their value proposition internally would probably go way up.
I love your value proposition. One of the things that I really want to do is find ways to empower our business to self-help. The questions that don't require extra legal insight, and a lot of the things that we're negotiating are really business issues that it's legal language, but it's not legal issues. And so empowering our business teams to handle those effectively would really move the needle in where we're going.
We'll get back to my interview in just a moment, but first, let's take a break to hear from the sponsors who generously support Law Next. And now, let's continue this week's interview. We hear a lot of talk lately about legal departments either bringing more work in-house or deploying more work to alternative legal services providers. How is your use and analysis of data driving your decisions around where you're sending the work and who's doing the work?
Well, I'll start with that if you guys are okay with it. When I started at DHL 11 years ago, we were a legal team of 7. Today it's 61. Some of that has been organic growth. Some of that commercial contracts management team created, et cetera. But a lot of it came on the heels of us having literally a 20-80 spend. 20% of our spend was in-house, 80% external. And yet when I looked at the external cost, I said, wait, there's commodity work. Why aren't we sending real estate leases out? Why aren't we sending procurement contracts out? Why aren't we sending some of our EEOC claims out? Now, it took me the better part of a year to get aligned with the business to say, this is how much money we're spending on external counsel, and we will have a little bit of duplication over a period of a year, but bring it in. Now, yeah, it was a little challenging for about a year and a half as we did, but we just took it away from outside counsel, to be candid with you. And it has worked out tremendously for us with regard to the growth, not just of the legal department. It's not just about the growth, but it's a service level as well. And the more intimacy with the business that generated.
Yeah. Anybody else have thoughts on that question?
I would just add, I think this is a place where technology can definitely help as well. There are definitely technology tools out there that will help with the workflow of different activities where you could do that in-house instead of having to go outside. Access to information to answer questions. Jason and I have been having some conversations about how we might be able to take advantage of some of the content and information that we have integrated into their internal platform in a seamless way, such that it makes it really easy for internal staff just to almost like a self-serve portal for them, so they can answer questions. And if the internal staff can't do it, then the internal counsel team can do it instead of having to go outside and have external counsel provide at a much higher cost.
So let's observe the meta pattern on a lot of what we're talking about here. On some level, what we're really talking about is unbundling work. There is a thing that has to get done that is a legal process, and historically the way we've addressed this is we took all of the pieces and we gave it to one person and we said, you be the middleware, you be every part of that. And that's probably not the way to do this going forward, because in many pieces of work there are judgment pieces and they're basically process pieces. And so as we start thinking about how we actually decompose the work into the elements that comprise it, then we can actually start splitting elements out to the technology stack. We can take some of the repeated portions, and where it's not appropriate to apply technology, we can take maybe some low-cost human resources and apply that. And where you need real judgment, where you need somebody who understands the why of things and what's happening, then you send it to an expert. But what we're talking about is a process that can basically be applied to everything that we do. And when you start doing that unbundling and refactoring, you start figuring out who the resource is that can do that specific thing for you most capably, most effectively, most efficiently.
Right, without regard to their traditional role, their traditional position.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because the challenge there is understanding the end-to-end flow of whatever that work product is and who's actually participating in it, right? Who's involved? And where can technology be applied? Where do you have to go outside? Where do you have the capabilities in-house? Where do you have the capabilities within your own staff? Finding people that can help understand that and think about the problem that way is a big deal.
And that's actually
go ahead.
one of the interesting things about ALSPs today versus 10 years ago. So when I started at Cognizant, we were using P3 for kind of like our junior resources, and then we brought it in-house and created our own offshore India team to support us. And now, we're looking to set up an SOW center of excellence, which we've, done that SOWs, but we've never really created an intentional process and SOPs around it, and we're looking at doing that now. And I'm looking at ALSPs not because I need the bodies, which I definitely do, but also because they're bringing technologies and they're bringing consultants and they're bringing analytics that I don't have at the ready. And so it's a completely different value proposition from what it used to be.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned you're really looking at legal problems differently, right? You're not looking at them just as legal problems. You're looking at them as business problems, and how do you get those solved in a way that at the highest value, I guess, and the best efficiency, and yet get the problem solved, right? Is that a fair way to put it? So along those lines, how does this change? We talked about how it kind of changes your relationship with outside counsel, but how does it change your relationship within the larger company and the role of the legal department within the larger company?
For me, it has really put the law department more in the category of business people who happen to have law degrees than lawyers whose degrees are hanging in the office. Except in one instance, none of my people have their law degree hanging on their office wall. And it's not because of edict, it's just because that's just who we are. And we have found that our internal survey data with our business partners that we do every single year, in fact the entire global organization does it, continues to go up and up and up. The more that we align with the business in seeking their objectives. Feedback from the finance department. I haven't had a budget review in 7 years. Budget gets submitted, it gets approved, they know we're fiscally disciplined and we're going to meet our targets. But looking for new and more creative ways to spend their money. We put the legal ops team in place 9 years ago, which was unheard of. When I said legal ops to my business people, they're like, you don't need anybody in operations. You're just a bunch of lawyers and paralegals. But then they see the value in what they're doing, from everything from the performance reviews. They're running a business, and it is a multi-million-dollar business. And they're doing things that I am not and never have been trained to do, which is bring that discipline to the organization. Now, over time, I've learned to do it, but the more that I'm able to speak to the business leaders, and the more that my people who are servicing the broader organization can speak to those people they are supporting in business terms that relate to the service that we're delivering in a fiscally responsible way, the more the internal value proposition and perception just goes up naturally, Bob.
Right. Jason, what about Microsoft? How is the sort of legal department's relationship with the broader company changed or evolved at all in recent years?
So bringing more insights to how we talk about the services and the value we deliver is helping us be a more trusted and valued partner. So the thing I observed over the last, so I've been at Microsoft 9 years now, is the way that we talk about what we do has really changed. It used to be this kind of, these words around like, oh, there were no blockers, or oh, there was the absence of pain and problems and things like that, which I think were very much in the milieu of how people talked about, in the business context, what were you doing? Well, we were making sure nothing bad happened. And that has radically shifted. And it is all talking about how we are accelerating the business. And the thing that I have observed is there's a much deeper empathy from my colleagues about really understanding what matters to the business. Like, what do they care about? And then when we take action, reflecting the impact of that back using the words that they understand. So rather than, bearing people and talk about indemnity clauses and things like that, it's, we got the deal done, we got it done 20% faster. It's the things that matter to them. And so that is an overarching pattern that I'm observing, which is, I think, part of our culture change. Now, the really interesting thing is we were always doing that. We always were doing that work. And so a lot of it is just getting, I think, a little bit better at telling the story. So I think we had a mature organization that had great capabilities. And so it is very much taking that customer obsession approach and really trying to read back to our customers, hey, I'm hearing you, and I hear the things that you care about so deeply, and so I'm going to give you that. And we've seen a lot of goodness come from that, because then they're like, you're a fantastic partner. I will give you more access. I will give you more proximity. And so again, it becomes a virtuous cycle.
Yeah. I'm not sure everybody believes that they were always doing that, but at least in some companies they probably were. Lori, is there anything on that you're...
Sure. Well, I think, I view my job as de-siloing the organization around the areas where legal is involved. So contracting, it's not about the sales does this and legal does this and HR does this and security does that. It's really about creating these more of an agile concept around the entire process. And one of the things that I'd like to do this year is create kind of a contracting center of excellence that's not owned by legal, not owned by sales, but really owned by the collective organization, where we bring all of our expertise together and have one central area where we bring the best of the best.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wonder if I could ask you to all to kind of put your Nostradamus hats on for a second. I mean, we're still in, relatively speaking, the early days of really making use of data analytics in law practice generally, or in legal departments specifically. I know Lexis is always talking about this concept of data-driven law and evolving data-driven law. Where are we going to be in 10 years with this, or even 5 years with this? Where do you see this developing or progressing? And Jeff, you're immersed in this.
Sure. So, one of the challenges I think we all have is there's so much information coming at us so fast, and just finding ways to get access to that data, getting access to the answers you need as quickly as possible is really, really hard. And so our focus is really, how do we take this massive amount of information and help glean those specific insights that is needed within the context of the workflow of the individual, whoever the end user is. And so there's no doubt that analytics is going to help with that. It helps you get to the answer more quickly. It summarizes the information. It allows you to do what-if type statements, to check for different options, to consider different alternatives. And I think particularly as fast as AI technologies are changing the landscape today, you're going to see significant improvements over time with a lot of that data being summarized and linked together, and answers to questions that you may have much more accessible than you ever had in the past. But what's really important is, based on the context of what you're doing and presenting the specific answer that the individual is looking for based on the work that they are in fact doing.
Take a second to think about the best-run law firms in the country. They consistently handle more cases in less time while spending fewer hours toiling over tasks like billing and client intake. My case was designed to help even the busiest law firms achieve peak efficiency. Through automation of routine administrative duties, templatized workflows, and centralized calendars, My case makes short work of your day-to-day processes and keeps your staff on task. Visit mycase.com to learn more and start a free trial. That's mycase.com. Lori, any prognostications about where this is all heading?
Well, I've read Susskind, so we won't have a profession in 10 years.
Go out and get his book.
But I do think, the point about access to information. The law is not going to be a mystery anymore. Being a lawyer isn't going to be about, I know what the law says about this. It's going to be all about the interpretation and the application in a way that is much more I shouldn't say, we do that today. Lawyers do that today all the time. It's that the other things that we do, we won't be doing anymore because the business will just be able to access it themselves. They won't need to ask me, can we do a 9-hour workday? Because that law will just be there for them to grab.
Right. So it's beyond just demystifying the law, but making it more accessible, more transparent, really, to everybody within the business.
Exactly.
Yeah. Jason, how about you? What are your predictions for where we might be heading with this? Where do you see this going?
I think there are two general things that we'll see show up in the next probably half decade. So one is much greater capability to reason over the communication layer. So if we think about data that's in a database as fully structured, and we think about a contract as basically something that's semi-structured, so you know more or less where things are and there are certain entities. And then we think about where you have the ground truth of what's happening in the business. That's almost always communication, like your emails, your chats, things like that. And so I suspect that we will start having greater capacity to have machines reason over that layer to give us very powerful experiences that go in both directions. So it's not just being able to understand like the ground truth of what's happening when your sales team is doing X or Y, but the ability to, in real time, augment their capabilities, going back to what Jeff was talking about, with insights that are contextually relevant, delivered before someone is about to make a decision. So if we think about the way that a lot of legal work plays out, it's somebody made a poor decision, and then you have to write an insurance policy to basically clean it up, right? What if, in the business substrate, we were able to basically say like, hey, did you know that X? And that allows someone to, before we actually have that thing ripen into a real issue, get solved. I think that could be very, very powerful. The other pattern I expect...
So preventive law, predictive analytics.
Are you guys working on that solution right now?
Look, these are just ideas. But I will get to why I think there's what is changing in a moment that may enable more of this. So the other thing that I suspect we'll be able to do is start running experiments. So the ability to effectively cordon off a control group and try something a little bit different and just see what happens. And so when you're thinking about what does data-driven really mean, it really is like at some point apply the scientific method, which means you need to come up with a hypothesis, you need to plan your experiment, collect data. I think we'll be able to do that. And the reason that I think the next half decade or so is going to see the acceleration of this is the tools that are coming online are getting much more approachable. So even in our work, we've started to basically use a bunch of no-code options that are letting us get closer to instrumenting that communication layer and provide experiences that feel very natural for the people who use them. And so once you start doing that and you can start getting structured information off that, doing some interesting techniques, then you start to get that virtuous cycle that we're talking about that allow you to build domain-specific taxonomies and ontologies that let you reason over what people are actually saying. And so that's why I think that could get really interesting.
That is really interesting to think about the idea that data can make us not just better understand what we do, but better at what we do. Mark, you get the final predicting role here. So,
a bit of my prediction is based on history. Law departments for the better part of not just decades, but centuries, and law firms as well, have been reactive. A matter comes in, a matter gets handled, and we move on to the next one. And in my opinion, that is always going to be there. Litigation may go down, our alternative ways of solving disputes may arise, arbitration, mediation, but there'll still be a reactive component because, well, stuff happens. But the law department that really moves the needle is the one that's going to be proactive. When you talk about data, whether it's structured data or unstructured, 80% of the data that most companies have is unstructured data, and you think about where did you get your data 25 years ago? You went to a file cabinet, you pulled it out and said, hey, what's the matter? And you knew exactly what was in that file, generally speaking. But today that data is everywhere. It's on an iPad, an iPhone, it could be anywhere, on a hard drive somewhere. But the law department that partners either internally with their IT team or perhaps with an external service provider, Jeff, that first and foremost gets their hand around where is all that data, creates. Think of your mind as this virtual file cabinet. Mm-hmm. Imagine having a customer anywhere in the world, and right now that data is everywhere. One email leads to 2, and 2 leads to 200 before you know it with reply alls. But being able to pull all that data in, or being able to mine your data, as the most proactive law departments will be, in my estimation, in the future, to identify and then mitigate risk. I mean, imagine a situation where you've got a salesperson somewhere in some organization in your own company that has a price list of a customer, or there's communications that are going on where the keywords are pricing, anti-competition, and list. Those are things that the law department, those hit our Achilles heel. But imagine if you had the ability to pull all that data in and say, hey, Judy, you can't do this. Right. Corporate policy says this. Or if you have a way to bring it in. So I think the law department that is really proactive is going to partner with the appropriate IT provider, perhaps an ALSP like LexisNexis or others, to help the organization identify what that risk is and seek to mitigate it. Sometimes lawyers will, in talking to the business people, will get a response, well, tell me something I don't know. Well, if I had a way to tell you that in your own files you had these risks, and this is what I'm going to do to mitigate them, you'll be off and running. I think it's a ways to go before we get there. But the volume of data every single day in an organization just continues to explode. And yeah, you can talk about infrastructure costs and server costs and everything else, and just imagine how much you'd save just by whittling that data down if you had your own document retention policy that you enforced throughout your organization. But that reactive is going to continue to shift to the proactive as more and more leaders of law departments are more of the business people than the lawyer.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think Jason hit on something because, how do you bring this disparate set of data, whether it's emails, whether it's external data, news information, contracts, how do you bring all that together and rationalize it and connect the dots between it? That's a really tough problem, but as Jason mentioned, there are technologies that are coming out, particularly machine learning, natural language understanding, some of these technologies that will help actually facilitate bringing all that data together in a much more holistic way.
Well, on that note, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to participate in this today. I really appreciate it. We've been talking here with Jason Barnwell, Assistant General Counsel Microsoft, Jeff Reel, Executive Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at LexisNexis, Lori Ehrlich, General Counsel and Head of Operations, Legal Operations at Cognizant, and Mark Smolek, Chief Legal and Compliance Officer at DHL. Thanks for listening, everybody. This is Bob Ambrogi. This special podcast today was recorded live at Legal Week in New York. I want to give a big shout out to Valerie Chan, the CEO of Platform PR, who was instrumental in helping us line up the guests for the various podcasts that we recorded here during Legal Week. You can find out more about Platform PR at www.plat4orm.com. Also, a big shout out to our Patreon supporter. A reminder to our listeners that you can help support the show by visiting our Patreon page at patreon.com/lawnext. And one of our top level supporters there is John Grant, founder of Agile Attorney Consulting, agileattorney.com. A big thanks to him. And a big thanks to our sponsor who makes this show possible, MyCase. With thousands of customers, is a trusted practice management solution, helping lawyers across the country run organized, efficient, and successful law firms. You can try My Case for free today at mycase.com. And last but not least, thanks to Ben Ambrogi for producing and editing the show. That's it for this week. This is Bob Ambrogi.